A police officer stood over an 18-year-old university student lying on the ground. The teenager told him that he had been injured, but the officer did not believe him. A few moments later, the teenager said it again. Then he said it again. Meanwhile, another man nearby was telling police a completely different story. He claimed that he had been attacked. He claimed that he had been targeted because of his race. He claimed that he was the victim. The officers listened. The teenager continued telling them that he had been injured. He repeatedly told them that he could not breathe. Then the officers placed him in handcuffs. His name was Henry Nowak. He was 18 years old. He had only been at university for a few months, and what happened during his final minutes would spark national outrage, multiple investigations, public protests, and questions that are still being asked today. In December 2025, Henry Nowak was in his first year at the University of Southampton. He was studying accounting and finance. He was the first person in his family to attend university. Friends and relatives described him as hardworking, ambitious, and kind. He had grown up in Chafford Hundred in Essex and was one of 4 siblings. By all accounts, university life was going well. He played football. He had built a new group of friends. He was beginning the next chapter of his life. On the evening of December 3rd, 2025, Henry went out with friends and football teammates. CCTV footage later showed him leaving his accommodation and making his way through Southampton city centre. He visited local shops. He spent part of the evening at the Hobbit pub. There was nothing unusual about the night. It looked like the sort of evening experienced by thousands of university students every week. Later that night, Henry began walking back towards his accommodation. Evidence later showed that he had consumed alcohol during the evening. However, tests would show that his alcohol level remained below the legal drink-drive limit. That detail would later become important, because after the attack, claims would be made that Henry had been drunk, aggressive, and looking for trouble. The evidence would tell a different story. Shortly after 11 p.m., CCTV cameras captured Henry making his way home. At one point, he could even be seen jogging along the street. He was alone, he was unarmed, and he was only minutes away from reaching home. Instead, he would encounter a stranger carrying a large dagger. That chance meeting would change everything. The stranger was 23-year-old Vikram Digwa. Digwa lived locally and was a member of the Nihang Sikh tradition. That night he was carrying 2 bladed items. One was a small ceremonial blade. The other was a much larger dagger measuring approximately 21 centimeters in length. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Henry and Digwa crossed paths on Belmont Road. There is no evidence that they knew each other. According to the judge, it was simply a chance meeting. Fortunately, part of the encounter was recorded. Henry had taken out his phone and started filming. The Snapchat video recovered by investigators would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. The footage captured Henry speaking to Digwa. At one point, he asked him whether he was a bad man. Digwa responded with a sentence that would later be repeated across newspapers and television reports throughout Britain. "I am a bad man." The recording ended shortly afterwards. What happened next was witnessed only by Henry and Digwa. According to the evidence accepted by the court, Digwa grabbed Henry's phone. A confrontation followed. The prosecution argued that Digwa then drew the larger dagger that he was carrying. Henry then suffered multiple sharp impact wounds, and one of these wounds to the chest would prove fatal. The attack happened incredibly quickly, yet despite suffering devastating injuries, Henry remained on his feet. His next actions would reveal just how desperate the situation had become. He ran. He climbed onto a wheelie bin. He climbed over a fence. He desperately tried to get away. A trail of red DNA showed the route he took. Neighbors reported hearing him shouting that he had been injured badly. At this stage, Henry was already suffering from an injury that he would never recover from, yet the most shocking part was still to come, because instead of helping him, Digwa began filming. The court later heard that he recorded Henry as the injured student struggled to escape. Those recordings would become an aggravating factor during sentencing. Within minutes, emergency services would be called. But before police arrived, a completely false version of events was already beginning to take shape. At approximately 11:30 p.m., a 999 call was made from the scene. The caller was Gurpreet Digwa, Vikram Digwa's brother. The call would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case.
Police emergency?
Yeah, we just been attacked by someone racially. Yeah, this.
Right.
He just attacked it, took it to start off. Sorry? Huh? Sorry, we just got attacked racially by some white person.
Right, okay. Whereabouts are you?
We're on Belmont Road.
Just out in the street, are you?
Sorry?
You just in the street?
Yeah, literally, I just parked up my car to come home and he's attacked my brother.
Are you talking about verbally or physically?
No, he physically attacked my brother. We're Sikhs, we wear turban and he's just attacked my brother.
Have any weapons been involved?
No. Can we have someone out here, please, ASAP?
Yeah, you can. Tell me a number you're outside of, can you?
No, so Belmont Road, down the police station. Pardon?
Okay, I've got you. Bear with me.
Okay. And he's also recorded some as well on his phone. So can we please have the police out here urgently?
Yeah. Listen, I'll get someone there straight away. It's not going to delay anything now. Just bear with me. I need some details, okay? So just answer some questions.
He's verbally attacked my brother racially. He's attacked my brother and took his turban off. Then he's recorded it on his phone thinking he was going to do something. So I need someone here ASAP, please.
I hear
we're restraining him, so I'm not letting him. I can't let him go until this gets sorted. I'm not being racially attacked and letting this get away with it.
Okay, listen. What's your name?
Gurpreet Digwa.
During the conversation, Gurpreet told the operator that his brother had been the victim of a racially motivated attack. He claimed that Digwa had been targeted because he was Sikh. Most importantly, he repeatedly stated that no weapons had been involved. That statement was completely false. By the time the call was being made, Henry had already suffered multiple sharp impact wounds. The operator informed Gurpreet that both police and ambulance crews were being dispatched. While emergency services were making their way towards Belmont Road, events at the scene continued to unfold. Digwa contacted his parents. His mother and father arrived before officers reached the location. By the time officers arrived, the most important piece of physical evidence was no longer there. The officers were also arriving with information that was completely wrong. They believed they were responding to an incident involving a possible racially motivated assault. They believed no knife had been involved, and they believed that Digwa was the victim. Those assumptions would shape everything that happened over the next few minutes. Police officers arrived roughly 7 minutes after the emergency call. What they encountered was a confusing scene. Several people were present. Henry was lying on the ground. Digwa was nearby. The dagger had already been removed, and officers had been told that Digwa was the real victim here. Body cam footage recorded everything that followed. Months later, with the permission of Henry's family, that footage would be released to the public. Millions of people would watch it. The controversy surrounding this case would largely revolve around those few minutes. As officers approached, Digwa immediately began explaining what he claimed had happened. He told officers that Henry had assaulted him. He told officers that Henry had used racist language. He pointed to minor injuries on his own body. The officers listened. Meanwhile, Henry was lying nearby. Almost immediately, he began telling officers that he had been critically injured. The statement was clear. He said it again and then again. One officer responded with a sentence that would later appear in headlines across the country. "I don't think you have, mate." At the time, the officers still believed they were dealing with an assault in which Digwa was potentially the victim. What they did not yet understand was that the situation was the complete opposite. As the conversation continued, Henry repeatedly told officers that he could not breathe. Again and again, he said the same thing. The footage shows his condition continuing to deteriorate. Meanwhile, the officers remained focused on controlling the scene and establishing who they believed was responsible. From their perspective, they thought they were dealing with a potentially aggressive suspect. The problem was that the suspect was standing nearby, talking to them as a victim. The victim was the person on the ground. That reality would only become obvious later. While Henry continued pleading for help, officers moved to restrain him. His hands were pulled behind his back. Handcuffs were applied. He was informed that he was under arrest. The contrast between what officers believed and what had actually happened could not have been greater. The man who had carried out the attack was standing nearby giving his version of events, and the man who had been attacked was being placed in handcuffs. Throughout the encounter, Henry continued trying to explain what had happened. There was no evidence of aggression. There were no threats. Instead, there was an 18-year-old whose condition was visibly worsening. At one point, officers briefly checked part of Henry's body. However, they still appeared to accept the account they had been given by Digwa and his family. Then, everything changed. Henry's responses became weaker. His voice became quieter. Eventually, he stopped responding altogether. Only then did officers realize the seriousness of the situation. The handcuffs were removed. An ambulance was urgently requested. CPR began at the scene. But by that point, Henry's condition had become critical. Later during the trial, the court heard evidence from a pathologist regarding the severity of the injuries. The fatal wound had damaged a major vein within Henry's chest. The judge later stated that the injury was unsurvivable and that no realistic emergency treatment would have changed the outcome. That finding would become important during later discussions about the police response. The court's conclusion was that Henry's injuries could not have been survived. However, that medical conclusion did not stop public anger when the footage was eventually released. For many people, the most difficult part was not the medical evidence. It was watching an 18-year-old repeatedly tell officers that he had been hurt. It was hearing him repeatedly say that he could not breathe. And it was watching those warnings fail to change the direction of the encounter until it was far too late. At 12:37 a.m. on December 4th, 2025, Henry Nowak was pronounced dead at the scene. Less than 4 hours earlier, he had been captured on CCTV, leaving his university accommodation for a normal night out. Now detectives were preparing to launch a murder investigation, and the deeper they looked into the evidence, the more the story told by Vikram Digwa began to fall apart. In the days that followed Henry's death, detectives began piecing together exactly what had happened on Belmont Road. The deeper they looked, the more problems they found with Vikram Digwa's account. One of the most important pieces of evidence came from Henry himself. The Snapchat recording recovered from his phone captured the interaction before the attack. Jurors would later watch the footage during the trial. The recording showed Henry asking Digwa whether he was a bad man. What it did not show was any evidence of racism or any obvious threat. And what it did not show was the aggressive behavior that Digwa would later claim had taken place. Investigators then examined the physical evidence. Digwa had claimed that he acted in self-defense. However, Henry had suffered multiple serious wounds, while Digwa's injuries were relatively minor. Digwa had claimed that he feared for his safety. Yet after the attack, he filmed Henry as the injured student attempted to escape. Digwa had claimed that Henry made comments pertaining to race. Yet detectives found no evidence supporting that allegation. As prosecutors would later point out, Digwa was the only person making that claim. The evidence continued to move in one direction. Detectives established that Henry had attempted to flee after being injured. Evidence showed the route he had taken. The videos recorded by Digwa showed Henry trying to get away. Rather than supporting a claim of self-defense, investigators believe the footage demonstrated the extent of Henry's suffering after the attack. Then there was the missing dagger. Police discovered that the weapon had been removed from the scene before officers arrived. Investigators concluded that Digwa's mother, Kiran Kaur, had taken possession of it and hidden it at the family home. That decision would ultimately lead to criminal charges. Another major development came from a covertly recorded conversation between Digwa and his brother. During the discussion, his brother suggested that he claimed self-defense. The prosecution argued that the conversation showed an effort to build a legal defense, rather than simply tell the truth about what had happened. By the time detectives completed their investigation, they believed they had a clear picture of events. They believed Henry Nowak had been attacked by a man carrying a large dagger. They believed the allegations of racism and self-defense were false, and they believed evidence had been deliberately concealed after the attack. On the 8th of December 2025, just 5 days after Henry's death, Vikram Digwa was charged with murder. The case was now heading to court. The trial began at Southampton Crown Court in May 2026. Over the following weeks, jurors heard evidence from investigators, forensic specialists, witnesses, and legal experts. They watched the Snapchat footage. They reviewed the physical evidence. They heard about the hidden dagger. They examined Digwa's claims. Throughout the trial, Digwa maintained that he had acted to protect himself. The prosecution argued the opposite. They argued that Digwa had deliberately attacked an unarmed teenager and then attempted to portray himself as the victim. On the 28th of May 2026, Vikram Digwa was found guilty of murder. The jury also found Kiran Kaur guilty of assisting an offender after helping to conceal the weapon. A few days later, Digwa returned to court for sentencing. Judge William Mosley described many of Digwa's claims as lies. He rejected the self-defense argument, and he highlighted the use of the dagger, the filming of Henry after the attack, the false allegations made afterwards, and the concealment of evidence. Digwa was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was ordered to serve a minimum of 21 years before becoming eligible for parole consideration. For Henry's family, the verdict brought justice, but it did not end the story, because by that stage, public attention had shifted elsewhere. Millions of people were now focused on what had happened after the attack. On June 2, 2026, body cam footage from the scene was released with the permission of Henry's family. The reaction was immediate. Public anger grew. Politicians demanded answers. Protests took place in Southampton. Questions were raised about police decision-making, public trust, and exactly how officers had reached the conclusions that they did that night. Several official investigations followed. The Independent Office for Police Conduct launched an investigation into the actions of the officers involved. A future jury inquest was scheduled to examine the circumstances surrounding Henry's death and determine whether any act, omission, or delay contributed to what happened. Throughout all of the political arguments and public debate, Henry's family continued delivering the same message. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability, but they did not want Henry's death used to create hatred or division.
This is an absolutely tragic case, and my sympathies are absolutely with Henry's family, his friends and his loved ones. I want to apologise. I want to say that I am sorry that Henry couldn't be saved that night. I'm sorry that he was handcuffed and arrested in the moments before he lost consciousness. It's quite clear that officers didn't understand what had happened immediately. And that is some of the context I would ask people to understand. There had been a delay from those who chose eventually to call them. There were lies from Henry's killer in that 999 phone call. Further lies from his killer as officers arrived on scene. And despite Henry telling officers he'd been stabbed, it took them some minutes to realise what had really happened. But within 3 minutes of that engagement with Henry, they were giving him first aid. They'd taken the handcuffs off and they were giving him first aid.
What action is being taken in relation to the officers who handcuffed him?
We referred ourselves immediately to the Independent Office of Police Conduct the following day, and they've been independently investigating ever since. We are absolutely committed to acting on their findings. The officers are witnesses in that case. As I say, it's clear to me the circumstances were complex. For example, Henry's significant wound, the wound that was fatal, was deep and internal. The pathologist was clear in court that it would have been hard to find. The bleeding was inside Henry's body.
And is your police force going to engage with the Sikh community to raise awareness of all of this as well and provide guidance on all of this?
So we pride ourselves in the way we engage with all communities, and we have been engaged with this community since this happened, as we have with the university community where Henry came from and the wider community of Southampton. And in that engagement, of course, we cover all issues that might be relevant, including the law.
Okay.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.